And this is a really hard thing for a caregiver to do, to say no, because you find yourselves in all these situations that are really difficult. And I said to my mom, I said, look, I haven't seen the leaves turn for 30 years because I've been in Japan. I'm going. If you don't want to go, don't go. And she came and she had a great time. And I wrote a blog called The Last Road Trip about that one. And it makes me cry even when I read it now. It's such a beautiful memory.
Hi, I'm Jim McCann, founder of 1-800-Flowers. We created this podcast to share the wonderful people we get to interact with, we get to meet, we get to know, and most importantly, get to learn from. So I invite you to join us on this journey here on the Celebrations Chatter podcast. Well, today we have a guest joining us, and we have a pal of mine co-hosting with us today. First, let me introduce you to our co-host. It's Rhonda Klug. Rhonda runs all our member experiences at our Harry and David brands, and comes to us from Medford, Oregon, where Harry and David grows and produces all the wonderful food gifts that we have there. And this is a busy season at Harry and David, so I'm glad you had time to jump in with us today, Rhonda. And joining Rhonda and I today is Debbie Howard. Debbie Howard is in her current role, one of the things she does, and we'll get into all the things she does, is advocate for caregivers. That's directly with people who are involved in caregiving, as well as employers who want to know how to handle this group of people, how to be more sensitive to their needs, how to enable them to be able to do all of the responsibilities they have in their work life, in their personal lives, in their caregiving roles. And so I think she's doing great work, and we've spoken about it before. How are you today, Debbie?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Well, I'd like to ask Rhonda to help me to help our community learn your story in a little bit more depth than we were able to do the last time. Rhonda, how did you meet Debbie?
So this goes back to when you sent me to Roanoke, Virginia.
It was a secret assignment. You weren't supposed to talk
Yes,
about
it was. And I came back with a whole new learnings. And that was, so that was the Care Colloquium Conference, the 3-day conference. And really I came back with the same idea that you wanted in terms of, Harry and David being the leader in the care giving space. In terms of e-commerce and beyond. And the first thing that I really wanted to accomplish with the whole team enterprise wide was creating a caregivers ERG, employee resource group, and that's where Debbie came in.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one of the most interesting aspects of that conversation, or a series of conversations you and I had, Rhonda, was as we were talking about this special group of people, and you were sensitizing me to the needs of some of the team members of yours there at Harry and David. All of a sudden, you said to me, "Oh my goodness, I was a caregiver." And I really didn't think of myself in that way. And a lot of the work that you do, Debbie, and Rhonda, now you, is help bring awareness to caregiving. Who is it? What do we do? So maybe the two of you help me understand, how do you define what the caregiver community is, and how is it changing?
Well, I think it's a really interesting question, Jim, because we do have what I would call underreporting. My background is market research, and we know the numbers are underreported. Whatever we hear from AARP, I'll just give you a good example. So the latest numbers from AARP are from 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic. And that was 53 million caregivers in the United States, 48 of whom were giving care to older adults. So the classic definition is of a family caregiver is those caring for aging adults, or I don't want to use the word disabled, but let's just say children who have problems or
Special needs.
challenges, special needs. Thank you so much. And so we can divide those children into those who are under 18 still living at home and over 18 still living at home. So it's about 53 million. That's the number AARP has. But a recent study by the Rand Corporation reckons it's more like 100 million. And they included more of a landscape across the United States, including veterans as well. So, I think as a market researcher, I'm fascinated by this, right? I feel I want a number. I want a number, a hard number, but actually, because caregivers don't self-identify, for example, just as Rhonda said, and even I myself, when I became a family caregiver for my mom back in 2008, I had never even heard the word caregiver. I didn't, I just went home to help my mom. There are definite underreportings happening. And I think the definition of caregiver, I'm just going to go a little bit further on that, has also widened quite a bit during the pandemic. So we realized that, of course, that family caregiver hard definition is one thing, but really there were many people during the pandemic, many parents who found that they were caregivers at home for able-bodied children, and that became an issue in the pandemic. So we now see a broader definition in the workplace, especially because if we want to help our caregivers in the workplace, we need to look at that wider prism. And so we are looking at care across all spectrums of life stages. And we're trying to normalize that conversation of the caregiving of the older generations, because that's tends to be what gets pushed aside a little bit and expected that we do it without any support. So that's just a few thoughts on my part.
Rhonda, how big a population in our business at Harry and David, how many people do you think are classified by that definition as caregivers?
Quite a few. Just from it's no matter what company you're in, you walk down the hall, you start having a conversation about your own experiences, and everyone has their own story to tell. So that's where the ERG comes in, is to try to reach those employees.
Explain what the ERG is for
Yeah,
us.
so the employee resource group, this is our fifth one in the company, and they're all very well managed and used. Where we as a Harry and David group come together and provide the resources needed for our employees. For instance, this month is National Caregivers Month. We have, it's called Caregivers and Allies Responding with Empathy. CARE is the acronym. And what this is we send it out across the whole enterprise. And Jim, how many employees we have across the whole enterprise. I don't know what that number is. I want to say,
So it's around 5,000 with FTE annualized and eliminating the temps.
Okay. So within all of those, we send out through our Care ERG email, we send out broadly information on when we're having our next speaker engagement, which we try to do it monthly. And for instance, next Thursday, we have the Alzheimer's Association coming in. And they're going to be talking about, so these are the experts in the field. We're not the experts in the field, but we can certainly bring in experts in the field and help manage those resources and continue to help our employees. So in this case, the bullets there is, what is the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? There is a difference, and this will be a big discussion on that.
So you bring resources in, you're trying to educate people in terms of the facilities and the resources that are available, sensitize our leadership and managerial ranks to how they can provide subtle yet beneficial assistance to people in their charge who have caregiving responsibilities, and bring whatever resources we can.
And provide all of those resources in our actual resource page so they can go back to it.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us about your journey, Debbie. You've lived and worked in Japan. I find that really interesting. You said in your opening comments that you did a lot of market research. Tell us about your career.
Thank you so much, Jim. I actually moved to Japan in 1985, and I was
Now,
about
how did that happen? Well, maybe I'll move. I'm going to move to Spartanburg.
yeah,
No,
let me
I'll go
just
to
go
Tokyo.
there. I actually was at a career break at about 10 years into my career, and I had a girlfriend who was a travel writer. She's still a travel writer, one of the most successful travel writers around. She does Frommer's guides to Japan and Hong Kong. And she had been writing me all these tantalizing letters. And I was living in Atlanta, Georgia, working for a corporation. And I like to say that I had Neiman Marcus pantyhose lined up in my closet in different colors. And, I was like a total bow tie, yuppie, female on the rise. And I was bored. And so when I was having these tantalizing letters from my girlfriend, Beth, my childhood girlfriend, I decided when I got a Christmas break that I was going to go see her. And I did. And it really changed my life.
How did it change?
I saw people doing things overseas that I thought I could do that. I could work overseas. Why can't I apply my marketing expertise in another market? Why can't I do that? And it was really interesting, and it just gave me a whole new perspective, Jim. And so I moved over there, and
Did you have a job, or
I
can
had
you just move, or do you have to like, hey, can I have permission to live here? What do you have to do?
I'm a big visualizer. I believe in visualization, and I took a leap of faith. It was very, very difficult at the time to make that leap of faith, but I did do it. And my original plan was to travel around the world for a year and fool around. And and I was 31 years old, and I had really good corporate skills, communications, writing, and employee communications, etc. And I figured I'd drop back on my skills and write and edit and stuff like that. And I got over there and I realized it was really, really expensive. And so I started looking for a job because it was fun to be there. And I thought, well, I saw some of my girlfriends working. I thought, well, maybe I can get a job. And I had 2 interviews and I got the second job. And it was in a market research company. It was in McCann, Erickson, Hakuhodo. At the time, those two were joined together, and I worked in their research division for 4.5 years, and then they
Everything comes back to McCann. I get it.
yeah, it's kind of funny. And I with their blessing, I was still on their visa, their working visa. And I started my own market research consultancy there. And that was back in the days. I started in '89.
And I
And
assume McCann Erickson, big firm. We've worked with them in the past. Made some friends there years ago on our account who are still friends today. So great shop. And I assume their clients were going to be the bigger clients, the big multinational Japanese clients.
yes, and American. So we had Amex and Coca-Cola and I worked on Northwest and Citibank and Swatch back in the day, all kinds of, and Ford and Cadillac. I worked on all kinds of things, and I learned about the Japanese society and culture through the market research, and that was amazing. And market research was a really natural thing for me. My degrees in journalism, in marketing and advertising, so it was just like pretty much falling off a log for me. And I'm a writer, so I loved it.
I assume your social network was expats.
Mostly, but I was a local hire, Jim. So I didn't have the fancy digs. I lived local, and I actually philosophically didn't want to be a fancy expat because I don't think you learn the culture the same way. Um, but I was living local, and I had to find my own places, and I had to get guarantors from the company and that sort of thing to rent places. But I did okay, and when I started my business in '89, I literally started my business as a female in Japan. I started what's equivalent to an LLC here, and I ran that business for 20 years before my mom became
So you're
diagnosed.
all these 20 years, since 85, you're in Japan.
Oh, yes. I lived there full time for 30 years. Yeah. So
Did you develop the language skills?
my language skills are survival level, so I can be charming in drinking situations.
Yep.
That's and I can boss taxi drivers around. I can get money. I can do the eating and drinking thing. But I'd also like to mention that because part of my experience in Japan that was really, really important to what I do today was I was the first female president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Japan, and that is the preeminent business organization in Asia for because of U.S. Japan relations. For example, we met every month with the ambassador and his team so that we would have our advocacy positions very well coordinated for the U.S. Japan government relations and building American business regulatory and deregulatory situations in Japan. And that experience, I mention it because not only from a leadership viewpoint did it help me, because I was a small business entrepreneur with a 12-person company, but also I ran a 2,000-person organization on a volunteer basis as the elected president. And I learned the advocacy game from the best. Like all the government affairs for Fortune 500 companies were on my board. So it really, once my mother became diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer and I became a family caregiver, that was another life-changing experience for me, because as a marketing person, I did not know what I was doing, as you can imagine. I mean, none of us, most of us don't know what we're doing when we're thrown into these family caregiver roles. And what I could do was boss people around and learn. I could research and I could
But
get
you had to feel
information.
completely ill-equipped to do anything because you're half a world away.
Well, I was. And so I was a caregiver from afar until I went home to live with her the last 6 months and be her full-time caregiver. But it was such an experience that it really turned me into an advocate for family caregivers, because I thought our system was not ready.
Grew up in South Carolina,
I did. Greenville.
and you have a couple of siblings. I know you have a sister. Is it one or two?
Two younger sisters.
Uh-huh. And how often would you be home during that 30 years you lived in Japan?
Once a year for sure. And once mom became sick, I was going home much more, like 3 and 4 times a year, and then finally full time.
So that caused you to move back and change your life dramatically. That was in '08.
That was in '08, and I continued to run the business in Japan. I had a really good team there. I put my 28-year-old longest term employee in charge, and and you remember, of course, 2008, we didn't have all that we have now. We had some of it, though. We had internet. I was able to work the time zones. I
But we
ran,
didn't have video calling like we do now, which
no,
saved many of us during this COVID situation.
yeah, we,
But we didn't have that in '08. All we had
no.
was a financial crisis.
Well, and I came right out of my mom's dying into the financial crisis. And I hadn't been working hard on new business development for a year and a half. So it was really, I know you're an entrepreneur, Jim. I have seen the tips of my airplane going down and burning on fire a couple of times, right? And I've pulled it out a couple of times. So I'm really proud of that. And I think it speaks to my resilience and my a little bit craziness.
Okay, Rhonda, help me here, but it seems that don't confirm the crazy part, please. Uh, it seems to me that you're a learner, and you mentioned visualization before, and my writing partner, Dr. George Everly, has taught me an awful lot about the power of visualization. How did you visualize things? You had this terrible situation. Your mom is diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. You're trying to extend your reach and help her from afar with your siblings, I assume. And then you decide you're going to move back and become her full-time caregiver. What I was impressed by in your book, the Caregiver's Journey, which you wrote back in 2018, uh, and the subheading there being information, guidance, and inspiration. What obviously you wrote that book because you wish it was there for you. Which of the things that you learned uh, made the biggest impression on you in terms of reordering your priorities. I know in your book you wrote that your mother, I think 9 years before her death, sat you all down, and she had a plan uh, for as she got older in terms of keeping her affairs in order and not making life more complicated than it needed to be for her children. I was blown away by that. But how else could you have planned to make it better for everyone and to make her time and your time with her all the more valuable and pleasant?
Thank you for asking. And I like to say that my situation was about as good as it gets. Okay. And I say that for a number of reasons. We had a plan, which is unusual to have a plan.
I'd have to believe it's very unusual.
It is unusual, and especially it's often
Made me take some notes here on what I should be doing.
it's we had a plan. My mom had long-term health care insurance. Only 10% of all those age 65 or more in the States have that now. So we forget that Medicare doesn't take care of long-term health care and catastrophic illnesses. So we had a plan. My mom had long-term health care insurance. She had a safe place to live in a 55 plus gated community with a second bedroom en suite, so I could stay in there and have my own space and my own little desk to work on. You know, these things are huge in the world of caregiving when we think about it, right? And I will also say this, Jim and Rhonda, my mother had stage 4 lung cancer, and so she only lasted for 1.5 years. The average time of caregiving is 4.5 years. And if it's dementia or Alzheimer's, it can be 15, 20 years. So if you look at my situation, it was quite easy, and it almost killed me and my sisters. It depleted us financially, emotionally, physically. It's a very heavy emotional load to bear. And that's, I think for me with my book, I want to encourage people to focus on self-care and focus on planning, because those are the two things you can do to be as ready as you can. You can never know exactly what's going to happen, but we can be ready with by taking care of ourselves and making sure our loved ones are taking care of themselves, and we can have a good plan. And even in my mom's case, we did not have those last few months mapped out. We had everything up to there, but man, it goes crazy those last few months when somebody is really on the way out. And it's very hard. You don't know what's going to happen. We could have, my mother had a do not resuscitate. And I hear all kinds of horror stories, as you can imagine. I've interviewed over 200 caregivers to write that first book. And I hear in many, many cases, almost as many as half, DNRs are not honored in the hospital because there's some fluke, some legal fluke that happens that, oh, it's not that situation, it's another situation. And then the person who thought they had that kind of coverage doesn't have it honored. And that's a horrible, horrible thing. For example, my mom, she was able to die at home. And that's very unusual. Only about 10% of the people get to die at home. Everyone wants to, but most people end up going in the hospital because something happens on the way that makes you have to be hospitalized, and then you never come out. Or maybe you're in assisted living. So my mom was really, for so many reasons, we were very, very fortunate. But still, that last leg, that's what most people miss out in the planning situation, and we missed it as well.
Can I add on to that right quick, Jim? So just to your point, Debbie, that's the learnings that we've had over the last 2 years. And as Jim mentioned earlier, you know, I had parents that I was taking care of 2 years ago separately. They've both passed. And there's so many things that you can go through personal, like who knew? You know, and I went to the Care Colloquium conference way before that happened, and who knew? And this, just everything that has happened in my life, I like to apply to this ERG. And to your point, in terms of self-care and planning, it just doing that makes your life so much easier. You always look back. It's kind of like some of the platforms that we have now, Talkspace, Torchlight. I got to test Torchlight, and it was be after my parents, but it's a platform where, so I put my mom in, I put my dad in, and put their illnesses in, and things populate, and some things you don't even think about because you're so in the moment of caring for a loved one. You don't think about anything. You don't think about a will, and those are the things that'll start to populate. Have you thought about a will? Have you thought about a trust? And those types of things. And moving forward, so in January, we're having a trust and estate lawyer come on. We've had a probate lawyer on, not to say, here's how I can help you. It's here's how I can help you to prevent probate. And probate's a natural thing that goes through law, so it can be good. It can be a good thing. But for January, ours is more about here's the steps you can take to be planful.
Hi, I'm Jim McCann.
And I'm George Everly Jr.
During the COVID-19 epidemic, I stumbled upon an article that Dr. George wrote, which had a real strong impact on me in terms of how COVID was and was likely to impact our social connections, our relationships. And it really, really resonated with me. So I reached out to George, basically wrote him a fan letter, and that began our relationship.
We found a mutual interest in helping people become their best selves, especially in times of adversity.
Together, we embarked on a quest to co-write Lodestar. That journey began with countless hours of researching the most impactful self-help books out there.
Once we had our picks, we combined the science with the practical.
The result of our journey, the creation of a one-stop shop for the best of the best in self-help.
We decided to write this book to help others go from where they are to where they want to be and be the best possible selves they could be.
So if you're looking to boost your career, build stronger relationships, or simply become the best version of yourself, Lodestar is here to guide you on your path.
Let me ask you both. You mentioned before, Debbie, about you're a visualizer and how important it's been in your life, and you've learned to use that to get you through tough situations. Always have a clear path of where you're going, even if it doesn't exactly work out that way. If you know where you're going, it's better. Attitude is a big part of it. Visualization is a part of attitude, in my understanding. And in terms of attitude, I think there's so much to be applied here, and every circumstance is unique, I'm sure. But I think I just hear it in my own world. People who talk about, I'm a caregiver, woe is me, versus people who say, what a wonderful opportunity I have, like I hear in your voice, Debbie, and I've heard from you, Rhonda. What an opportunity I have. I'm fortunate that I live in this community, that my parents are nearby, or my mom, my sisters are nearby. I'm so fortunate that I'm in a situation where I can do for my loved one. Very different attitudes, right? This is an opportunity we have, or, oh, this is a burden. How can I get out of this burden? Or how do I cope with this burden? Or feel bad for me? Attitude makes such a difference in terms of how we handle these situations. Talk about attitude in your life, Rhonda.
Yeah, so when I was taking care of my parents, I would have to travel 21 miles out just to pick up my dad and bring him in for dialysis, and he had that 3 times a week. Then I had to start, relying on some of his family members to help bring him in. But at the end of the day, you don't know how long someone has, and to embrace the fact that you're even there to take care of a loved one and to give them an opportunity. So for instance, my dad was kind of down on, having to go through dialysis. And I said, Dad, think about it this way. You're retired. My dad fortunately retired early. He retired when he was, I think, about 62. And so this was like 10 years later that this started happening to him. And I said, think about it this way. When you go into dialysis, take all of your bills, take all of your stuff, think about it as a part-time job. You can take care of all of that during that time. And it just it was great. And then when he came in, he did his grocery shopping. Oftentimes I'd meet him there to help him with that. And it changed his outlook on life. And then it changes your own outlook because you're helping to feed positive, things, yeah, that makes a difference.
Well, I love that, Rhonda. That's great. And I'm making notes as you're talking because it's so important. I didn't I did take the time to think about what would I do differently after the fact. And one of them was long-term care planning. I also would have gotten a therapist. I absolutely would have engaged a therapist with caregiver support type experience. I didn't think about it, right? It's like you say, Rhonda, you just don't think about it at the time. I did take breaks, Jim, and we tried to make it fun. We tried to enjoy the time we had together. And I had been living overseas for 20 years when my mom became sick, and so for me to have 6 months with her full time was amazing. And we were able to go through pictures, and I would visualize, Jim, when it was hard. Okay, I would visualize a halcyonic type vision where I was sitting there with my mom in white light, and we were going through pictures and doing cool things. And sure enough, we did some of that. And we also we also had happy hours every night. I would make happy hour, and she had a couple of close friends. Near the end, I was the gatekeeper, and my mother would be on her deathbed, literally. And I tell stories because I think we need to normalize this conversation. This is life. This is part of life. My mother was in her deathbed. Somebody, nice Southern lady, would come to the door with a peach cobbler, right? And of course I'd be like, oh, that sounds pretty good. And she'd want to say hi to my mom, but my mom didn't know them well. They were in the community, but she didn't know them well. My mother would be there going, like that. And so then I would say, oh, she's sleeping, she doesn't feel so well today. And and it was really an honor to do that for her. And it was funny too. It was kind of funny too. And we did have a couple of close in people who could come over for a drink, and my mom couldn't have a drink after a while because it burnt her tongue, right? The gin was not good. And so she would have a fake drink, and we would have a mocktail for her. And I would do things like buy triple cream brie and really nice hors d'oeuvres, because why wouldn't you want to make it nice? I would put a flower on her tray in the morning, and we tried to make it fun and nice.
Not just for her.
No, for me, for all of us, for
And then it's
everyone.
memories.
It's memories too. Yes, Rhonda, you need memories, and you want good memories. And this is why planning and self-care are so important, because it gives you that time and space so that what you're doing is not just transactional at the end, right? You don't want to do, you want that time with your loved one. I actually took my mom to look for pillows one day, and we learned that a lot of the big box stores will actually give you a wheelchair if you give them your driver's license. This is a new trick that we learned a long time ago. I'm sure it's done now as well. So once we learned that trick, I could take my mom anywhere pretty much. And so as long as I could get her in the car. And we also went on a final drive to look at the leaves turning in South Carolina, which are quite beautiful, and something our family used to always do every year. And up until the 5 minutes before we left, my mother was saying, I don't feel good, I don't want to go. This was about 2 weeks before she passed. And I said, look, Mom, I'm going to go, right? And this is a really hard thing for a caregiver to do, to say no, because you find yourselves in all these situations that are really difficult. And I said to my mom, I said, look, I haven't seen the leaves turn for 30 years because I've been in Japan. I'm going. If you don't want to go, don't go, right? This is the kind of thing. And so finally, of course, she was shamed into coming. She came, and she had a great time. And I wrote a blog called The Last Road Trip about that one. And it makes me cry even when I read it now. It's such a beautiful memory.
Tell me, how's your life today, Debbie? You've had this experience. You wrote this book in 18. You're involved with coaching and counseling. What's the mix of your professional activities today?
Well, I'm super fortunate, and thank you for asking. I just turned 70 in January.
You got to give us a secret to what we should be eating so we look like you.
Self-care, planning, travel a lot. Stay busy and vital. That's the thing. But I'm still chairman of the Japanese company. I sold my Japanese company to the Carter Group, and that company now is involved in doing an age tech accelerator in Japan. So I get to work on bringing age tech products to the Japanese market, which is my old bailiwick, if you will. And I get to work on promoting my 2 books and doing the consulting and working in this caregiver advocacy space, which is a huge passion and honor of mine.
So tell us about book number 2.
Oh, that one came out in March of 22. It was my pandemic project.
See, it's another example of not letting a good crisis go to waste, huh?
Never. And it really has everything a company needs to become more caregiver friendly. So I have 5 free downloadable worksheets with it, and I can give you some links and everything for the show notes. But
What a pro.
I
She
know.
knows there's going to be show notes. She's already going to populate them for us, huh?
And I
I
have
think
to say,
she's
that's the book that we have shared with our HR teams across the enterprise as well.
yeah. And it's really, Jim, it's all about, surveying your employees, looking at what you've got and adding some programs and some modules to help fill it out. So let's say you have a financial planning course for your employees. Add a unit, add 2 or 3 hours of training on planning for caregiving and long-term health care. If you have a mental health and well-being type program, add a few components that are directly related to caregiver needs across the spectrum. So it's a very practical book, and it's very hands-on, and I can help you with it or not. It's fine. You can do it yourself. It's designed to do it yourself. I really want with my training and consulting, I want to make companies self-sufficient so that they can handle it internally. Because if companies don't own this themselves, I don't see it happening as well. I want companies to embrace it and own it. And so I really try to enable employees with leadership within the companies to be able to deliver that on a long-term basis.
So this is November. We have Thanksgiving fast approaching, Rhonda. Uh, One of the things that we talk about internally here at the Flowers Companies is taking advantage of November as the month of thanks, not just waiting for Thanksgiving, but to be thankful for a bunch of different things. How are things going in the Valley? How are we gearing up during this National Caregivers Month, the month of thanks? And how is the Thanksgiving holiday fast approaching looking for you?
Yeah, so like I said, we had the Alzheimer's Association come in several months back. Had a conversation with them. They do a number of things, Walk for Hope, those types of things that we can actually engage our employees in. Volunteering. Like everyone may have a loved one with some type of dementia or something else that they want to help support. And that's why we're bringing them in next week to have that conversation with our employees. And they are here in Oregon, Southwest Washington area, but there's locations across the U.S. obviously. And for instance, we had an employee email us and say that she's from Jericho, and she said, my mom has dementia. I really need help. I don't know what I'm doing. And so between myself and my 2 co-leads, Kelly Taylor and Kim Huckabee, we reached out to our team here locally, and they gave us all of the information in the Jericho area for this person. So it doesn't matter where we are nationwide, there's always resources. So that just, really more about employee engagement, and like you say, Jim, just giving thanks, for so many different things, not just caregiving, but Thanksgiving, and just working with our employees in general and giving them the opportunity to volunteer.
You mentioned before if you were going to give advice to someone going through your journey, you tell them to get some self-help, someone that can talk to, a professional, or ideally a professional mental health who's got experience with caregivers. And Rhonda, you mentioned companies like Talkspace and other resources that we make available. It seems to me it's a lot more available now than it used to be because of the idea of things being virtual now. Talkspace, in particular, a company I'm familiar with and a happy investor in, they do some good work. And I guess if someone needed or wanted to find out about those services, A, they can do the search on their own, but B, their human resources offices will have that contact information, know what plans are eligible for, like we do at our companies, Rhonda. But let me ask you a personal question. Is that something you would do even if you weren't going through crisis now?
Yeah, I believe in therapy. I absolutely do. Whenever I have had trouble in my life, I have gone and engaged a therapist. I just did not think about it at that time. It's shocking how it throws you into just a conundrum of decisions that you weren't ready for, and duties and responsibilities you weren't ready for. And it really impacts the way that you think about, how can I fix this? How can I manage it? And so that's why I also like what we're talking about. You mentioned, Jim, that there are a lot more solutions and resources out there now. Yes, compared to whatever that was 16 years ago for me, but it's also becoming a more normalized discussion in our world and in our country. Especially with COVID and what happened during the pandemic, we had so many more people impacted by the whole idea of how do we help our older adults? We had people moving back home from assisted living facilities. We had catastrophes in assisted living facilities. We had a lot of people, let's say 35 to 50, who suddenly became caregivers for parents who were perfectly fine before the pandemic, but suddenly needed support with shopping so that they could reduce their exposures of being outside. So it really changed, I think, the conversation. And I have seen, I mean, I've been following this since 2008, pretty religiously, and I would say that we are really hitting some critical mass in terms of getting this topic out there and more normalized to discuss.
Well, there's an ever-growing need. 10,000 boomers turn 65 every day, and there's a lot more to come. So this is and there's fewer young people proportionately. So this is a crisis that's going to continue. And maybe with the work that you're doing, Debbie, it's not so much a crisis, but handling another life stage and being prepared. If a company, employer, or an individual wanted to get in touch with you, Debbie, how would they do that?
Debbie at thecaregivingcrisis.com.
Debbie at thecaregivingcrisis.com. Well, thanks for sharing your wisdom with us today, Debbie. Rhonda, thanks for partnering with me once again.
Absolutely.
Good conversation, good lessons here. And yes, there'll be show notes, Debbie, so we can pass on some of that contact information. Thanks for your time today. We're thankful, Rhonda and I, that you shared your time with us today.
Very thankful. Thank you, Debbie.
I'm very thankful that you invited me, and I'm very honored to see you again and be on your podcast.
We put our heart into everything we do. We are farmers, bakers, florists, and makers who grow and create with a passion. Made with love at every step of the way. Because at the end of the day, we know you're sending more than a gift. 1-800-Flowers, share with love.
Well, I hope you enjoyed what you heard, and I know I'll be sharing it forward. I hope you get to as well. Let's keep the conversation going. Follow me along on Twitter at Jim 1-800-Flowers and on LinkedIn at Jim McCann. Hope to talk to you soon.